Stop explaining yourself. The Stoic Art of Detachment. There is a moment in every person's life when they realize they have spent years explaining themselves to people who were never truly listening. Years justifying choices that did not need permission. Years defending feelings that were already valid. You may not notice the cost at first, but it builds quietly. Every explanation chips a little piece off your confidence. Every justification signals that your worth depends on someone else's approval. Every attempt to be understood becomes a negotiation for your own identity. This constant pressure to explain is not harmless. It drains focus, weakens self-trust, and turns your life into a public courtroom where you stand as the defendant of your own existence. You begin to think twice before acting because you imagine how others will judge it. You second-guess your instincts because you fear how they might react. You shrink your presence because you want to avoid confrontation. You start living a life shaped by opinions instead of principles. But what if this exhaustion is not a flaw in you, but a sign that you are living out of alignment with your own nature? The Stoics believed that a person loses freedom the moment they become dependent on external validation. They taught that clarity is an inner responsibility, not something that must be proven or performed for others. When your decisions come from your core values, rather than from the fear of misunderstanding, you stop needing people to agree with you. You stop trying to convince them. You stop holding your peace hostage to their reactions. There is a powerful shift that happens when you no longer make your life a debate. You stop apologizing for who you are becoming. You stop explaining why you no longer tolerate what drains you. You stop defending your boundaries because they are yours, not up for negotiation. Suddenly your mind becomes lighter, your decisions become sharper. Your presence carries a quiet strength that others feel even when you say nothing. Detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the moment you choose to protect your inner world instead of offering it to anyone who demands access. It is the discipline of letting your actions speak instead of filling the air with explanations that only weaken your position. And it is the foundation of unshakable confidence, because nothing is more powerful than a person who knows their direction and refuses to explain it to those who do not walk alongside them. This introduction opens the gate to a deeper truth about why we explain ourselves, how it destroys our peace, and why detachment is the Stoic answer to this modern struggle. As you move into the next chapter, you will understand the core principle that separates those who live freely from those who live for approval. Prepare for the shift that happens when you realize your worth does not need witnesses. There is a truth at the center of Stoic philosophy that most people never hear because it cuts directly against everything society trains us to believe. From childhood, you are conditioned to explain yourself. Parents ask why you made a certain choice. Teachers demand reasons for every mistake. Friends want justification for your feelings. Partners question your decisions. You grow up internalizing the idea that your actions must be validated by someone else before they can be accepted. Over time, you begin to believe that your worth becomes real only when it is witnessed, acknowledged, or approved by the people around you. The Stoics saw this as one of the greatest traps a human being could fall into. They insisted that a person begins to suffer the moment they outsource their sense of self. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes chaotic when it tries to manage how others think. Epictetus warned that anyone who seeks external validation becomes a slave to it. Their message was simple and absolute. Your value is not a public negotiation, it is an internal contract. The more you look outward for reassurance, the more fragile you become. The more you turn inward for grounding, the more unshakable you are. Most people never learn this principle because it requires a level of inner responsibility that society does not encourage. It demands that you build an identity so rooted in your values that no external misunderstanding can shake it. It demands that you trust your judgment even when others disagree. It demands that you become the kind of person who can stand alone in your truth, without explaining it to those who do not have the capacity to understand it. This is not arrogance. It is alignment. When you internalize this principle, life becomes clearer. Decisions become less dramatic. Opinions lose their power over you. Instead of asking, how do I make them see my point? You begin asking, does this align with who I want to become? Instead of thinking, what will they think of me? You start thinking, is this action true to my standards? That shift changes everything. You stop living like a shape that molds itself to every expectation around you. You become a steady form, defined from within. This chapter is not about ignoring feedback or refusing connection. It is about recognizing that your center cannot be built from external voices. A person who understands this principle stops explaining every boundary because the boundary itself is enough. They stop defending every decision because their integrity stands behind it. They stop chasing recognition because their sense of identity no longer depends on applause. The result is a kind of quiet, grounded presence that others instinctively respect without needing explanations. This is the beginning of detachment, the liberation that comes from realizing you do not need witnesses to validate your worth. As you move into the next chapter, you will see why people often demand explanations from you and how understanding their motivations frees you from the pressure to satisfy them. The more you understand their expectations, the easier it becomes to detach from them with clarity instead of conflict. People often assume that when someone asks for an explanation, it is because they care, because they want clarity, or because they seek understanding. The truth is far more complex. Most of the time, the demand for explanations has very little to do with you and everything to do with the other person's need for control, security, or familiarity. When someone questions your choices, they are often confronting their own discomfort, not your decisions. Understanding this releases you from the pressure to justify every step you take. Many people rely on explanations because they fear losing influence over you. Your growth threatens their sense of predictability. Your boundaries disrupt the version of you they are used to. Your silence challenges their assumptions. When you begin to change, evolve, or detach, others interpret it as a disruption to the comfortable narrative they have created about who you are. To restore that sense of control, they demand explanations. Why did you do that? Why are you different? Why are you pulling away? Why are you choosing this path? What they rarely admit is that your transformation exposes the areas where they refuse to grow. Your clarity highlights their confusion. Your discipline highlights their avoidance. Your courage highlights their fear. Explanations become a tool for them to pull you back into the space where they feel safe, even if that space limits you. And when you do not offer explanations, their discomfort intensifies, not because you are wrong, but because they must confront the truth without you softening it for them. Some people demand explanations because they want your choices to align with their expectations. They do not want to understand you. They want you to fit the script they have written. This is why over-explaining never satisfies them. No matter how detailed your reasoning is, it will not make sense to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. You could present the clearest logic and the calmest explanation, and they will still ask for more because what they truly want is not clarity but compliance. Others demand explanations from a place of insecurity. They interpret your independence as rejection. They take your boundaries personally. They believe that your decisions are a commentary on their worth. In those moments, you are not explaining your actions. You are soothing their ego. The problem is that no amount of explanation can heal someone's insecurity for them. Detachment becomes necessary because taking responsibility for their emotional reactions keeps you stuck in an endless cycle of justification. Understanding these motivations allows you to detach without guilt. It reminds you that someone else's confusion is not your burden. Someone else's discomfort is not your assignment. Someone else's misunderstanding is not your problem to solve. The purpose of explaining yourself is to communicate, not to convince. When communication becomes performance or self-defense, it crosses a line that harms your peace. Detachment begins when you see that explanations are often requested not out of fairness but out of expectation, entitlement, or fear. When you see the truth behind these dynamics, you stop offering pieces of yourself to make others feel comfortable. You stop negotiating your identity to keep the peace. You stop reasoning with people who are not ready to meet you with respect. In the next chapter, you will discover the identity trap that forms when you constantly justify yourself and how it slowly weakens your sense of who you are. This is the turning point where the shift from external dependence to internal authority becomes unavoidable. There is a subtle form of self-betrayal that happens when you explain yourself too often. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, and most people never notice it until the damage is already done. Every time you justify your choices to someone who has not earned the right to hear them, you erode the foundation of your identity. You begin to reshape yourself around what others want to hear instead of what is true for you. You start thinking in terms of how your decisions will be perceived rather than whether they align with your values. This is how you slowly drift away from who you are. The trap forms because the moment you start defending your actions, you place yourself in a lower position. You step out of your authority and into a posture of proving, persuading, or seeking permission. Even if you do not intend it, over time your mind learns that your truth is not enough unless someone else approves it. This creates a fragile identity built on external reactions instead of internal conviction. You hesitate more. You doubt yourself more. You weaken the very voice you should be strengthening. When you live in that trap long enough, you become hyper-aware of how others might judge your decisions. You anticipate criticism before it comes. You soften your boundaries to avoid being questioned. You compromise your needs so you do not have to explain them. You censor your authenticity to avoid tension. You shrink your desires because they might provoke opinions. In the end, you no longer act from purpose. You act from fear of being misunderstood. The Stoics knew this pattern well. They believed that the greatest danger to a person's integrity was the desire to be seen as acceptable or agreeable. Marcus Aurelius warned that you lose yourself when you try to match the expectations of others. Epictetus taught that your peace depends on keeping your mind aligned with your own principles, not the shifting demands of those around you. Once you internalize this, you begin to understand that excessive explaining is not communication, but self-negotiation. You trade your clarity for temporary comfort, and the price is your identity. Detachment becomes essential because it breaks this cycle. When you stop explaining yourself, you force your identity to stand on its own. You allow your choices to be yours. You strengthen the parts of you that have been softened by years of justification. You rediscover the freedom of acting from inner truth instead of outer pressure. This does not make you distant. It makes you whole again. There is also a deeper consequence of over-explaining that many people overlook. When you justify yourself too much, you teach others how to treat you. You show them that your boundaries are negotiable. You show them that your decisions are open to debate. You show them that you can be talked out of your direction. People begin to assume that you owe them explanations because you have always given them. Your compliance becomes their expectation, and breaking free from that pattern becomes harder each time. The identity trap is not just about losing yourself internally. It is also about enabling others to shape your identity externally. Detachment frees you by shifting the responsibility back where it belongs. Your life is not a group project. Your choices are not public property. Your purpose does not need approval to be valid. In the next chapter, you will learn how detachment transforms from an internal stance into an external presence that quietly shifts power in every interaction. You will discover why silence, clarity, and calm neutrality become some of the strongest communication tools you will ever possess. There is a moment in personal growth when you realize that your greatest strength is not in the explanations you give, but in the ones you refuse to give. Detachment is not withdrawal, arrogance, or coldness. It is a strategic form of communication that shifts the balance of power in every interaction. When you no longer rush to defend yourself, when you no longer scramble to correct every misunderstanding, when you no longer allow your emotions to be dictated by someone else's expectations, you create a presence that speaks louder than any argument you could make. Most people believe communication is about words, responses, and clarity. The Stoics understood something far deeper. True communication begins with the state of your mind. If your mind is unsettled, every explanation becomes a plea for acceptance. If your mind is grounded, every silence becomes a statement of confidence. Detachment gives you the ability to respond without being emotionally hijacked. It allows you to remain calm while others get reactive, measured while others push for confrontation, steady while others try to provoke instability. This kind of detachment is not passive, it is intentional. It is the discipline of refusing to react from insecurity. It is the strength of choosing not to explain when explanation would only invite more questioning. It is the awareness that clarity does not require noise. You begin to understand that not everyone deserves access to your thought process, your motives, or the reasons behind your decisions. The more selective you become with your explanations, the more others instinctively respect your boundaries. Silence becomes a tool, not an avoidance. A short answer becomes an assertion of autonomy, not a dismissal. A calm tone becomes a sign of inner mastery, not indifference. The less you try to convince others, the more they take you seriously. People feel the difference when your peace is not negotiable. They sense when you are no longer performing for approval. They recognize the shift when your presence communicates authority without aggression or defensiveness. Detachment also changes the emotional climate of conversations. When someone expects you to justify yourself and you choose stillness instead, their attempts to pressure you lose power. Their urgency falls flat. Their demand for explanations hits a wall of quiet certainty that they cannot manipulate. You create a space where only truth remains, stripped of drama, validation seeking, and fear. This is where real strength reveals itself, not in arguments won, but in peace preserved. One of the most powerful aspects of Stoic detachment is that it teaches you to respond with intention rather than impulse. You are no longer pulled into emotional battles that drain your energy. You no longer feel responsible for managing how people perceive you. You no longer allow assumptions to dictate your reactions. You begin to communicate from awareness instead of anxiety, from principle instead of fear, from clarity instead of confusion. This transforms every relationship in your life, including the one you have with yourself. Detachment is not about withholding emotion. It is about protecting your center so that your emotions serve you instead of exposing you. It is about understanding that your peace is your responsibility. It is about recognizing that not every comment deserves a response, not every question deserves an answer, and not every misunderstanding deserves a correction. When detachment becomes part of your communication style, you stop wasting energy on correcting the wrong people. You preserve that energy for building yourself. In the next chapter, you will step into an even deeper transformation, learning how to build a life that speaks so clearly through action that explanations become unnecessary. This is where detachment evolves from a communication strategy into a way of living that anchors your identity and shapes your future. There is a level of clarity you reach when you stop trying to justify yourself and start living in a way that makes explanations unnecessary. This is the essence of building an unexplainable life. It does not mean becoming mysterious or distant. It means aligning your actions so consistently with your values that your life becomes the evidence. People may not always agree with you, but they can no longer question your direction. Your choices speak with a weight that words cannot imitate. The reason most people feel pressured to explain themselves is because their actions and identity are disconnected. They make decisions that contradict their deepest intentions, or they hesitate so much that their purpose becomes blurry even to themselves. When your life is built on hesitation, you feel the need to defend every step. But when your life is built on conviction, you no longer owe anyone a tour through your reasoning. Alignment eliminates the need for explanation. To build a life that does not need defending, you begin by defining your principles with brutal honesty. Not the principles that sound good to others, not the ones you feel pressured to adopt. Your principles, the ones that match your nature, your goals, and your long-term vision. Once those principles become non-negotiable, every decision flows from them. You stop choosing based on approval, comfort, or fear. You start choosing based on consistency. People question you less when they see that your choices follow a clear, unwavering pattern. The Stoics lived by this concept with absolute discipline. They believed that character speaks louder than argument. They refused to rely on explanations because they understood that words are fragile when not supported by action. When your actions demonstrate courage, you do not need to explain why you walked away. When your actions demonstrate integrity, you do not need to explain why you stood your ground. When your actions demonstrate purpose, you do not need to explain why you changed direction. Your life becomes the message. Modern life complicates this truth because noise has replaced intention. People talk endlessly about what they want to do, what they plan to do, and what they hope one day to become. Very few take action with consistency. Very few embody their values. Very few commit to a path long enough for it to reveal who they are. That is why those who do stand out so dramatically. Their life carries a weight that others cannot ignore. Their silence holds more authority than most people's explanations. When you build an unexplainable life, you stop wasting time trying to prove your worth. You invest that energy in becoming someone whose presence already answers the questions people might ask. You develop habits that reinforce your identity. You pursue growth that aligns with your vision. You set boundaries that reflect your standards. You make decisions that express your direction without apologizing for it. Every step reinforces the message, "This is who I am, and I am not seeking permission to be it." There is another layer to this transformation. When you live with consistent intention, you become harder to manipulate. People can pressure someone who doubts themselves, someone who needs approval, someone who fears judgment. But they cannot move someone who acts from principle. They cannot guilt someone who knows their motives. They cannot destabilize someone who has built their identity on internal alignment rather than external acceptance. This is the hidden strength behind living an unexplainable life. It makes you untouchable in ways that explanation never could. In the next chapter, you will learn the emotional boundaries that allow you to stop carrying the weight of other people's opinions. This is where detachment becomes protection, clarity becomes peace, and your inner world stops depending on outer reactions. There comes a point when you realize that the heaviest burdens you carry are not your responsibilities, your goals, or even your struggles, but the opinions of others. These opinions, spoken or implied, take up space in your mind and shape your emotions in ways you do not fully notice. You begin adjusting your behavior to avoid disappointment, altering your choices to avoid judgment, and censoring your truth to avoid conflict. This is how the weight of other people's expectations becomes heavier than your own life. Stoic detachment offers a clear path out of this emotional trap. The first shift happens when you recognize that opinions are reflections of the person holding them, not reflections of you. People project their fears, insecurities, and limitations onto everything they observe. A judgment someone makes about you is often a mirror of their own unresolved battles. When someone calls you selfish for having boundaries, it reveals their entitlement. When someone calls you cold for protecting your peace, it reveals their need for constant emotional access. When someone criticizes your ambition, it reveals their discomfort with their own stagnation. Once you see this, you stop carrying their words like they are facts. You start seeing them as signals of who they are. The Stoics taught that emotional boundaries are not walls that isolate you, but filters that protect you. They believed that your mind must remain sovereign, guarded from opinions that do not serve your growth. To adopt this mindset, you begin asking a simple question: does this opinion help me become who I want to be? If the answer is no, it does not deserve space in your internal world. You let it pass without reaction. You let it dissolve without explanation. You reclaim your emotional autonomy. Most people struggle because they confuse responsibility with caretaking. They believe they must manage everyone's reactions so no one feels upset, disappointed, or confused. But this is not empathy. It is self-abandonment. You are responsible for your actions, not for the emotions someone chooses to attach to them. You are responsible for your choices, not for the stories someone creates to interpret them. You are responsible for your integrity, not for the comfort of those who do not understand it. This separation is the foundation of true emotional freedom. When you begin practicing this boundary, you will notice a powerful shift. You respond more calmly. You react less impulsively. You begin making decisions based on alignment rather than fear. You stop trying to be understood by everyone because you realize that not everyone is meant to understand you. Your circle becomes smaller but stronger. Your inner world becomes quieter but more powerful. You stop carrying weight that was never yours. One of the most liberating Stoic principles is this: what they think is theirs, what you do is yours. This creates a psychological division that frees you from the emotional collision between your truth and their expectations. You no longer collapse under pressure to explain yourself because you understand that reactions belong to the observer, not the creator of the action. When you protect your emotional boundaries, you protect your identity. You prevent the opinions of others from shaping your direction. You stop seeking reassurance from people who do not share your vision. You stop absorbing negativity that has nothing to do with your path. You reclaim your energy, your clarity, and your emotional space. In the next chapter, you will learn how to apply this form of detachment in everyday situations. You will see when explanation is appropriate, when it is unnecessary, and when it becomes self-sabotage. This practical map will give you the confidence to navigate relationships and decisions with clarity and strength. Detachment is powerful, but it is not about silence in every situation. It is about choosing your responses with intention instead of impulse. Most people struggle with this balance because they were never taught how to make the distinction. They either explain themselves constantly or shut down completely. Neither extreme brings peace. The Stoic path offers a middle ground built on clarity, awareness, and responsibility for your own inner state. This chapter gives you a practical modern framework for knowing exactly when to explain yourself and when explanation becomes self-sabotage. The first scenario is one of alignment. You explain yourself when the person you are speaking to has earned the right to understand your reasoning. This includes people who respect your boundaries, value your growth, and engage with you without trying to control you. In these rare relationships, explanation builds connection instead of draining your peace. When you communicate your motivations in an aligned relationship, it enhances trust rather than weakening your identity. The purpose is clarity, not approval. The second scenario is one of respect. You explain yourself when your actions affect someone directly and they are approaching you with sincerity. In these moments, explanation is not a defense, but an act of responsibility. It shows maturity. It shows integrity. It shows that you value the relationship enough to offer transparency. The explanation is not given to ease insecurity, it is given to maintain trust. The key difference is intention. You speak to support the relationship, not to justify your existence. The third scenario is the one that most people misunderstand. You detach when the explanation is being demanded out of entitlement, control, or emotional manipulation. This is where silence becomes a shield. When someone approaches you from accusation rather than curiosity, from pressure rather than respect, or from expectation rather than openness, any explanation you give becomes ammunition. Your reasoning will not lead to understanding because their goal is not clarity, their goal is dominance. In these moments, detachment is not avoidance, it is protection. The fourth scenario is where most people lose themselves, explaining out of fear. This is the moment you feel pressured to prove that you are still acceptable, still agreeable, still worthy. You rush to defend your choices because you fear judgment. You offer justification because you fear rejection. The Stoics believed that explaining yourself from fear is one of the quickest ways to weaken your spirit. Each time you do it, you reinforce the idea that your worth depends on someone else's reaction. Detachment becomes essential here because it forces you to confront the fear directly instead of hiding behind explanations. The fifth scenario involves decisions that need no audience. These are choices rooted in your principles, your long-term goals, your inner clarity. When you explain such decisions to the wrong person, you distort their meaning. Some paths are meant to be walked without commentary. Some transformations cannot be articulated to people who are not evolving themselves. The Stoic model teaches that explanations in these moments dilute your focus. Detachment preserves it. The final scenario is silence as authority. There are moments when your lack of explanation communicates more than your words could. When you calmly refuse to justify yourself, you signal that your decisions come from inner conviction. People sense the difference. They may not agree, but they understand that you are not someone who moves according to pressure. Silence becomes evidence of strength, maturity, and direction. This decision model is not about rules, it is about awareness. You learn to choose your responses based on alignment rather than emotion. You develop the ability to protect your energy while maintaining integrity. You stop justifying yourself in situations where explanation would only diminish your power. You stop withholding explanation in situations where transparency strengthens connection. You become intentional, and intention is the heart of all Stoic practice. In the next chapter, you will step into the transformation that comes from rebuilding confidence from the inside out. This is where detachment stops being a defensive strategy and becomes the foundation of a mind that cannot be shaken. There is a point in your journey when detachment stops being a reaction to external pressure and becomes a way of strengthening your inner world. This is where the work shifts from managing other people's expectations to mastering your own. True confidence is not loud. It is not theatrical. It does not come from being right or being admired. It comes from a deeper source, the quiet certainty that you can trust yourself. When this certainty grows, you become mentally untouchable because nothing external can shake the foundation you have built. Most people believe confidence is something you earn through accomplishments or recognition. The Stoics taught the opposite. They believed confidence is the natural result of alignment. When your thoughts, your actions, and your values line up, your mind becomes stable. You do not waver when criticized because your direction is not dependent on agreement. You do not collapse under judgment because you no longer outsource your identity. You do not seek validation because your sense of worth comes from living in accordance with your principles. This is the core of becoming mentally untouchable: clarity over confusion, intention over impulse, principle over pressure. The first shift in rebuilding confidence happens internally. You stop asking the world who you are and start telling the world through your actions. You make decisions based on who you want to become, not on who people expect you to be. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop delaying your growth to maintain familiar roles. You stop replaying past mistakes as if they define your future. Instead, you walk forward with the understanding that your identity is something you build, not something you defend. Every aligned action strengthens this identity, while every fear-based explanation weakens it. The second shift happens in how you handle uncertainty. Most people crumble because they attach their emotional stability to outcomes they cannot control. The Stoics believed that confidence comes from focusing strictly on what belongs to you, your effort, your discipline, your mindset, your choices. When you detach from results and anchor yourself in action, you become unshakable. You realize that external events cannot take away what internal discipline has created. This is how you become steady in chaos. You stop trying to control the uncontrollable and master the only territory that truly belongs to you. The third shift is in your emotional resilience. Confidence is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to face emotion without losing yourself in it. You learn to observe fear without becoming afraid, to notice doubt without surrendering to it, to experience disappointment without collapsing into self-criticism. You develop the capacity to feel deeply without being controlled by what you feel. This is where detachment evolves into emotional mastery. You create enough internal space to choose your response rather than react automatically. Power grows in that space. The fourth shift is in your presence. When you no longer chase approval, your energy changes. You speak with clarity instead of defensiveness. You listen without feeling threatened. You express boundaries without guilt. You move with purpose instead of performance. People notice this shift immediately. They may not articulate it, but they feel a steady, grounded strength in you. A person who trusts themselves radiates a confidence that does not need to be announced. It is evident in the way they walk, decide, speak, and endure. The fifth shift is in your relationship with struggle. Most people view adversity as a sign of failure. The Stoics saw it as the training ground of character. When you stop explaining your difficulties and start learning from them, you transform every challenge into a source of growth. Struggle becomes fuel, not a threat. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this shaping in me?" This shift changes your entire psychological landscape. Confidence no longer comes from life being easy. It comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes. At this stage, detachment is no longer about silence or boundaries. It is about strength. You become someone whose mind cannot be shaken by opinions, whose direction cannot be derailed by noise, and whose identity cannot be rewritten by external forces. This is what it means to be mentally untouchable. You live from the inside out, never the other way around. Only one chapter remains. The next part will close the journey with a final message on using detachment as a lifelong path to clarity, peace, and inner power. There is a moment in every path of growth when you realize that detachment was never about distancing yourself from the world. It was about returning to yourself. Throughout your life, you have carried expectations that were not yours, fears that were never questioned, identities that were shaped by opinions instead of principles. You explained yourself because you wanted to be understood, accepted, or approved. You defended your choices because you believed your worth needed witnesses. You justified your direction because you feared the discomfort that comes with walking your own path. Detachment breaks all of this, not by hardening you, but by freeing you. The Stoics understood that the greatest power a person can possess is mastery over their inner world. When you detach from unnecessary explanations, you reclaim that mastery. You stop handing pieces of yourself to anyone who questions you. You stop negotiating your identity every time someone misunderstands your motives. You stop bending your truth to fit the comfort of those who have no intention of walking the same path. You begin living from a deeper place, a place where your values guide you more than external reactions ever could. Becoming who you were meant to be requires a certain level of solitude, not in physical isolation but in mental independence. It means being able to stand firm in your choices even when others doubt them. It means trusting your growth even when others cannot see the vision behind it. It means choosing the long-term version of yourself over the short-term approval of the crowd. This is the essence of detachment, choosing alignment over acceptance, authenticity over performance, direction over distraction. When you detach, your life becomes quieter on the outside, but stronger on the inside. You no longer rush to fill silence with explanations. You no longer panic when someone misunderstands you. You no longer collapse under pressure to justify your boundaries. You learn that your peace is not something others can grant or take away. It is something you build through discipline, intention, and clarity. The more you protect that peace, the more powerful your presence becomes. You also begin to attract different people. Those who depended on your self-doubt to feel strong fall away. Those who needed you to justify yourself to keep control lose influence. Those who thrive on confusion no longer find space to create it. In their place, you draw people who respect your steadiness, who understand your silence, who value your principles, and who move with the same intention. Detachment does not isolate you. It filters your environment so that only what aligns can stay. Every step toward detachment is a step toward becoming the person your future needs, the version of you who acts with clarity, the version who stays grounded under pressure, the version who does not rely on external voices to validate inner truth, the version who walks with purpose instead of hesitation. This version of you is not created through explanation. It is created through action, discipline, and the refusal to compromise your identity for temporary acceptance. As you move forward, remember this: you do not owe the world an explanation for becoming stronger. You do not need permission to evolve. You do not need validation to live a life aligned with your principles. Your growth is not a debate. Your boundaries are not open questions. Your purpose does not require approval. Detach from the noise and return to your path. Detach from the expectations and return to your values. Detach from the misunderstandings and return to your truth. This is the Stoic art of detachment. Not escape, but elevation. Not distance, but direction. Not coldness, but clarity. You become who you were meant to be when you stop explaining who you are and start living it with quiet, unwavering certainty.